Working with CSS can be difficult and time-consuming, but it doesn't have to be. There are some things you can do which will make working with CSS much easier and faster. So in this video, I will give you 7 tips that can be applied directly to your CSS code, which will help you while working with CSS and also improve your code. And the first tip is using the DRY principle. DRY is a software development principle that stands for don't repeat yourself. This principle can be applied to any programming language and also for CSS. Now, as we can understand from its name, DRY suggests avoiding code repetition as much as possible. Here in the example, we have 3 buttons with different background colors. Now, the code on the left side look okay for some of you, but actually it's not, because every rule here is repeating itself for each button, so we need to improve this based on the DRY principle. So what we want to do here is taking the common rules into an additional class. So let's create here a new button class and copy the common rules inside of it. Let's clear this one and also this one. And finally, we need to add our new class here inside the HTML, which did exactly the same job, but with much less code. So always try to remember applying the DRY principle, because it will avoid repetition by decreasing the number of lines of code, and it will also help to improve the readability of your code. Okay, so our next tip is to use a preprocessor. A preprocessor is an extension language to CSS which brings additional features that we can't normally do. Especially in larger projects, you will see how beneficial it is to use a preprocessor, because it makes writing CSS much easier. And one of the most used ones is Sass, or also known as SCSS. You can do various things with Sass, like defining variables for your CSS rules, or nesting, for example, writing CSS classes inside other classes. You can use many other things such as partials, modules, mixins, inheritance, and many other things. And if you want me to explain Sass in a separate video in more details, then please let me know in the comments below. Okay, another tip I can give is don't use inline styles. This is mostly a mistake that beginners do, which decreases the quality of your code a lot and causes problems. Let's go back to our example and let's write here an inline style with the style tag. And let's define here a single line of rule for the background property. Give it purple. Now, if I do this, it will override the rule here in the class and takes this rule as a priority, so it turns the background of this button to purple but not blue anymore. This is not very good, and I will explain that under 2 reasons. And the first reason is it breaks the separation of concerns principle. According to the separation of concerns principle, the CSS, HTML, and JavaScript files should be separated in under different files for reasons like better readability and maintenance, and including CSS rules inside HTML tags directly, or like here under style tags, is breaking the separation of concerns rule. So the correct way is actually to come here and to create a separated CSS file. Let's call it main.css, and to copy all of the rule here inside this CSS folder as separated. And now the only thing we need to do is to include the file link here as a CSS style sheet link, and the name should be main. Okay, so now our rules are back. And the second reason why we shouldn't use inline styles is because of this overwriting issue. So as you see, the inline style that we defined here is overwriting the background color rule of the CSS class, which is also not good, because think of a larger project, and when I find this class somewhere, then I expect to see the purple background color here, but it is defined as blue. Even worse, if people don't have much experience with CSS, then for solving problems like this, because probably they won't find where the purple background is. They will quickly come here, and to fix this, they will quickly add an important tag, which does the trick and leads us to the next tip. Don't use the important tag. Okay, suppose that your CSS is not working and you made it work by applying the important tag. So what happens next? The important tag has the highest priority of all CSS selectors. You are basically saying to the browser to apply that specific rule with the important tag always and under any circumstances. This is not good because CSS rules can differ from one selector to another or from parent selector to child selector. And the only way to overwrite an important tag is to use another important tag, and this leads using more and more important tags, and trust me, this will quickly break your CSS code, so please stop using the important tags in your project. Tip number 5 is to use a naming convention. Naming selectors and classes in the right way is another important point for writing better CSS. Because when there are a lot of classes you need to write, it can be difficult to find good names for each of them. But actually the name of each selector should be self-descriptive and readable, like in these examples here, which is also a good sign of a quality code. Let's take this simple example here. You should avoid giving incomprehensible names like in this example. Instead of this, you can use declarative names like in this example here. So naming things in programming is not that easy, but there are various naming conventions that you can use in your project, and BEM is a well-known naming convention. BEM stands for Block Element Modifier, but I won't go into further details. You can check out this document to understand what BEM does. You can find the link in the description below. Another useful tip is using shorthands. Now, some of the CSS properties like paddings, margins, fonts, and borders can be written in a much simpler way by using shorthands. And using shorthands helps to reduce the lines of rules. So without shorthands, a CSS class will look something like this. But with shorthands, you see how simpler it looks, defining the exact rules by using shorthands. So for better readability and writing fewer lines of rules, you should use shorthands in your CSS. The last but definitely not the least tip is to learn using Flexbox or Grid. Building a responsive layout or aligning elements with CSS won't be easy unless you learn using one of these modules, either Flexbox or Grid. Both of these modules are offering an easier and flexible way to align elements without using floats or the older CSS position property. They are also very helpful for building responsive layouts, and I strongly suggest you to use at least one of them in your project and you will see the difference. So guys, these are some of the important tips you should definitely use for improving your CSS skills. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you do, please hit the like button. Thank you guys for watching and see you later.